There is a strange paradox in human history. The truth is often not buried deep in secrecy, but displayed openly before our very eyes, and yet we fail to see it. Power does not always hide behind locked doors or encrypted codes. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, disguised as the ordinary, the expected, even the laughable. The late George Carlin, with his razor-sharp wit, understood this. He wasn't just a comedian. He was a prophet of sorts, pointing to the uncomfortable realities that most of us would rather ignore. He joked, but his laughter cut like a scalpel when he said, "It's a big club, and you ain't in it." He was not merely entertaining, he was exposing. He knew that leaders, governments, corporations, and institutions often operate not by concealing information, but by overwhelming us with it, distracting us, or presenting the truth in such a way that we dismiss it as too obvious to matter. This is the unsettling tension. If the truth is right before us, why do we refuse to grasp it? Why do we accept half-truths and illusions when reality is knocking at the door? And what does this blindness reveal about the nature of leadership, power, and our own psychology as followers? The ancient Greeks wrestled with this same dilemma. Plato, in his allegory of the cave, showed us that people often prefer the shadows dancing on the wall over the painful clarity of sunlight. Nietzsche, centuries later, warned that most people cannot handle too much truth, that they retreat into comforting lies, myths, and collective illusions. This video will explore that haunting paradox, how leaders hide the truth not by concealing it, but by revealing it in ways that make us overlook it. And we'll do this through 6 core insights, weaving together philosophy, psychology, and Carlin's prophetic eye. By the end, you will not only see how power disguises itself in plain sight, but also recognize your role in either perpetuating or breaking free from these illusions. Imagine a crowded Roman amphitheater. The year is 80 CE, and 50,000 citizens have gathered under the blazing sun to watch gladiators spill blood for entertainment. Bread is handed out for free, and the crowd roars with excitement. Outside these walls, Rome struggles with political corruption, growing inequality, and fragile alliances. But inside, none of that matters. The emperor has given the people a show, and in the dazzling spectacle, the deeper truths of their society vanish. The Roman satirist, Juvenal, coined the phrase, "bread and circuses," to describe this strategy. Keep the people fed and entertained, and they will not question power. It is a lesson rulers have never forgotten. Fast forward 2,000 years, and the spectacle has only become more sophisticated. The modern world is saturated with constant stimulation, 24-hour news cycles, social media scrolling, celebrity scandals, consumer advertising. Unlike the Romans, we no longer need to travel to the Colosseum. The Colosseum is in our pockets, glowing at us every hour of the day. And here's the paradox. The truth isn't hidden. The truth is visible in statistics about inequality, in reports about wars, in whistleblowers' revelations. But the truth competes with 1,000 distractions engineered to capture our attention. The spectacle does not conceal reality, it overwhelms it. The French philosopher Guy Debord, in his book The Society of the Spectacle, argued that modern life is dominated by images and performances. Reality itself is replaced by its representation, the photo, the headline, the meme. We no longer engage directly with the substance of issues. We consume them as entertainment, as passing noise. George Carlin understood this perfectly. His comedy shows were less about jokes and more about pulling the curtain back on the circus. He once remarked that the average American is entertained to death. We laugh at politics as though it's theater because it is theater. Debates, campaigns, scandals, all of it, carefully choreographed. The leaders know that as long as we are busy watching the spectacle, we will not look too closely at the structures of power behind it. Nietzsche would have called this a strategy for keeping us in the herd. Most people, he argued, do not want the burden of truth. Truth is heavy. Distraction is light. It is easier to be dazzled by entertainment than to wrestle with uncomfortable realities. But here's the unsettling reflection. The spectacle is not forced upon us. We crave it. We willingly trade depth for distraction, silence for stimulation. The Roman citizens did not resist the gladiator games. They demanded them, and in the same way we demand our endless shows, our cheap entertainment, our quick doses of outrage and amusement. This raises a disturbing question. When leaders hide the truth in plain sight, do they really deceive us, or do we deceive ourselves? Are we not complicit, preferring the circus to the sunlight? Think about your own daily life. How often do you know deep down that something is wrong? The way society is structured, the way news is delivered, the way leaders speak, and yet you scroll past it, laugh at it, or let it drift into background noise. Carlin saw this with biting clarity. He knew that the spectacle wasn't just a trick played on us. It was a game we were happy to play with them, because it is safer, easier, and more comfortable than facing the truth directly. So the first revelation is this: truth does not need to be hidden when we are already too distracted to care. And the guiding question becomes, if distraction is the emperor's greatest weapon, what happens when we put down the circus and dare to pay attention? Picture yourself standing in front of a brightly lit supermarket aisle. Shelves stretch endlessly, filled with hundreds of different cereals, snacks, or sodas. Dozens of logos, flavors, and slogans shout for your attention. At first glance, it feels like freedom. You can choose anything you want, but pause for a moment, and you'll notice that many of those brands belong to just a handful of corporations. The illusion is not freedom of choice, but freedom of labels. This is one of the oldest tricks of leadership. Offer the people options, but only within carefully constructed boundaries. We are given a menu, not the kitchen. Plato saw this long ago in his allegory of the cave. The prisoners in the cave could debate endlessly about the shadows on the wall. They could argue about which shapes were better, brighter, or more interesting. Yet all the while, they were bound, unable to see the fire and puppeteers behind them. Their choices were real only within the prison of illusion. Centuries later, Thomas Hobbes argued that human beings surrender freedom in exchange for order. We accept authority because it promises stability, but in doing so, we often forget how narrow our range of choices has become. Leaders know this, and so they create structures that appear to grant us agency while ensuring that the outcomes never threaten their power. George Carlin, in his fierce way, cut right to the heart of it. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. His point was brutally simple. The wealthy, the powerful, the elite, they design the choices we believe are ours. The rest of us get to vote, shop, and argue, but rarely do we question the club itself. Think of politics. Two parties, two colors, two sets of slogans. We are told to fight passionately for one or the other, as though everything hinges on the decision. Yet behind the scenes, lobbyists, corporations, and entrenched interests remain untouched. The choice is real, but limited, framed to keep us focused on the surface while the deeper machinery grinds on. Psychologically, this satisfies our need for autonomy. Studies in behavioral science show that people are far more content when they believe they have chosen something, even if the choice is insignificant. Give a child two toys to pick from, and they will feel empowered, though both toys were selected by the parent in advance. Leaders play this same game at scale. They let us choose between pre-approved alternatives, and we mistake this for freedom. But here lies the deeper tension. Do we actually want real freedom? Because real freedom is terrifying. It requires responsibility, uncertainty, risk. Kierkegaard called this the dizziness of freedom, the anxiety we feel when faced with the vastness of possibility. And so often we retreat into the comfort of narrowed options. We cling to the illusion of choice because the reality of total freedom overwhelms us. Carlin, with his unflinching honesty, forced us to ask, do we even want to be in the club, or are we just addicted to complaining about being excluded? The second revelation is this: our freedom is often a carefully curated illusion, and sometimes we prefer it that way. And so the guiding question becomes, are you willing to question not just the options offered to you, but the very system that frames those options? If this kind of questioning resonates with you, consider subscribing. Every week we explore these uncomfortable truths, not to feed despair, but to help you see the world with sharper eyes. In the early 2000s, a phrase began circulating in American politics: enhanced interrogation techniques. At first hearing, it almost sounds clinical, even professional. But what did it really mean? Torture, beatings, waterboarding, the breaking of bodies and minds? Yet by changing the words, the horror was disguised. People who might have recoiled at the raw truth instead debated policy as if it were an abstract technical matter. This is how leaders hide truth in plain sight, not by burying facts, but by reshaping the language through which we perceive them. Words are not neutral. They frame reality. George Orwell saw this with chilling clarity in his novel 1984. He coined the term newspeak to describe a language deliberately designed to limit thought. If you reduce the words people have to describe rebellion, eventually they lose the capacity to even imagine rebellion. When truth becomes misinformation, when lies become alternative facts, the boundary between reality and illusion begins to dissolve. The French philosopher Michel Foucault added another layer to this idea. Power and knowledge are inseparable. Those who control discourse, the words, the narratives, the official truths, also control how society understands reality itself. Doctors, politicians, economists, priests, each claims authority through the language of expertise, and once a word is redefined by authority, the truth behind it is disarmed. Machiavelli, centuries earlier, gave the blunt advice: a wise ruler must master appearances. He wrote that leaders should not necessarily be virtuous, but should appear virtuous. Language becomes the mask. Call war defense, call censorship safety, call surveillance protection. By the time people question it, the narrative has already solidified. Carlin never tired of mocking these verbal disguises. He would list euphemisms like shell shock turning into post-traumatic stress disorder. Each new phrase dulled the raw pain of the reality. Words that once screamed now whisper. As Carlin put it, smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. His point was sharp. The truth doesn't vanish. It's simply anesthetized by language. But here's where the psychology deepens. Why do we accept euphemisms? Because they protect us. They let us distance ourselves from reality. To say casualties instead of dead children is to insulate our emotions. To say downsizing instead of thousands of families destroyed is to make tragedy manageable. Leaders weaponize language because we, the people, willingly accept the softened version of reality. It's not only manipulation, it's collusion. Philosophy pushes us to resist this. Socrates, in Athens, spent his life interrogating language. He would ask simple questions. What do you mean by justice? What do you mean by virtue? He knew that the corruption of society begins with the corruption of words. If we stop examining language, we stop examining truth itself. So let me ask you directly, how many of the words you hear each day are disguises? When you read the news, when you listen to leaders, when you even speak to yourself, how often are words serving to soften, disguise, or distort reality? The third revelation is this: truth is often hidden, not by silence, but by words themselves. And the guiding question becomes, are you willing to strip language back to its raw core, to call things by their true names, even when it hurts? Because to do so is dangerous, but it is also liberating. Imagine walking into a doctor's office. The tests are back, the diagnosis is grave, but the patient sits there shaking their head. No, that can't be right. I feel fine. There must be a mistake. The denial is almost instinctive. When the truth is too overwhelming, the mind builds a wall, not to deceive others, but to protect itself. The same mechanism operates at the scale of entire societies. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden by leaders at all. It's hidden by us, because we do not want to see it. Sigmund Freud called this repression, the burying of unbearable truths deep into the unconscious. But repression doesn't only concern personal traumas, it applies to cultural traumas too. Think of nations that refuse to face their violent histories, or communities that dismiss systemic injustice as if it were a passing rumor. Denial is not ignorance, it is willful blindness. Carl Jung took this further with his concept of the shadow. The shadow is everything we do not wish to admit about ourselves: our greed, our envy, our cruelty. Individually, we push these truths into the unconscious. Collectively, societies do the same. Leaders understand this and exploit it. They know that if the truth threatens our cherished self-image, we will often deny it, even if it is obvious. Thus, leaders need not hide the truth. They merely need to ensure it is uncomfortable. The people will do the rest. Kierkegaard captured the existential dimension of this. The truth is a trap. You cannot get it without being caught. You cannot get the truth in such a way that you catch it, but only in such a way that it catches you. To truly grasp reality requires sacrifice. It destabilizes who we think we are. That's why many prefer to look away. George Carlin saw denial everywhere. He knew that people could watch corruption, greed, and hypocrisy unfold in plain sight and still shrug, laugh, or carry on. He once said, "Most people don't want the truth, they want the illusions." He was right. Confronting truth demands change, and change is terrifying. Think of climate change today. The evidence is everywhere. Rising seas, burning forests, collapsing ecosystems. The truth is not hidden. Yet billions live as if it were not happening. Why? Because acknowledging it fully would mean radically transforming our lifestyles, our economies, our politics. It is easier to deny than to act. Leaders know this, and so they allow denial to fester, offering comforting half measures, slogans, or distractions. The truth is visible, but unbearable. The paradox, then, is cruel denial. Feels like protection, but it becomes a prison. Freud observed that repressed truths always return, often in destructive ways. Jung insisted that what we refuse to acknowledge in the shadow eventually controls us. Kierkegaard warned that despair arises not from ignorance, but from refusing to become who we truly are. So here is the fourth revelation. The greatest obstacle to truth is often not deception from above, but denial within ourselves. And the guiding question becomes, what truth in your own life have you been avoiding, not because it is hidden, but because it is too painful to face? Because until we are willing to look into that darkness, both personally and collectively, leaders will never need to hide anything. We will do their work for them. In 1945, when the world first learned about the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, many asked, how could ordinary people allow such horrors to continue in plain sight? The unsettling answer is that they did not see it as horror. What began as shocking soon became routine. The absurd had been normalized. The political theorist Hannah Arendt, who covered the trial of Adolf Eichmann, described this chilling phenomenon as the banality of evil. Eichmann was not a monstrous figure in the usual sense. He was ordinary, bureaucratic, even dull. He simply followed orders, signed papers, moved trains. The machine of atrocity functioned not because people believed in great lies, but because they adjusted to small ones, day after day, until the unthinkable became background noise. This is how absurdity works. It doesn't arrive suddenly. It creeps. It repeats itself until our shock wears off, until outrage becomes fatigue, and then it sets like concrete into what we call normal life. Albert Camus, writing about the absurd condition of human existence, warned that repetition deadens the soul. We live as though life were obvious, ordinary, when in truth it is fragile, fleeting, and strange. Political power works the same way. It numbs us through repetition. Say a lie often enough, repeat an atrocity long enough, and people stop seeing it as extraordinary. It becomes just the way things are. George Carlin understood this perfectly. He joked about how people accept absurdities in daily life, endless wars, mass surveillance, corporate greed, as if they were just part of the scenery. He once quipped, "When you're born in this country, you're given a ticket to the freak show. When you're born in America, you get a front row seat." His point was that the absurd was not hidden. It was the main event, normalized through repetition. Think of your own life. How many things do you accept today that would have horrified your grandparents? Constant advertising tracking your movements, cameras on every corner, your conversations monitored by algorithms. A few decades ago, these would have been dystopian nightmares. Now they're shrugged off as everyday conveniences. Arendt warned that this normalization is the real danger. Great evils rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They enter quietly, disguised as policies, procedures, slogans. The absurd becomes so woven into daily routine that questioning it feels strange, even foolish. People say, that's just how things are done, and so the absurd thrives in plain sight. Carlin's comedy wasn't really comedy at all. It was an attempt to snap people awake from this hypnosis. By exaggerating the absurd, he tried to make us laugh and then think, but too often we laughed and then simply moved on, numbed again by repetition. The psychological mechanism is clear. Humans adapt. We normalize quickly, even to tragedy. Psychologists call it habituation. The more we are exposed to something, the less emotional impact it has. This helps us survive, but it also makes us complicit in the slow erosion of truth. So here lies the fifth revelation. The greatest horrors rarely hide, they simply repeat until they no longer feel like horrors. And the guiding question becomes, what absurdities have you already accepted as normal, and what might it cost to wake up to them again, to feel the outrage that once seemed natural? Because the moment we stop questioning the absurd, it ceases to be absurd at all and becomes our reality. Imagine standing on a cliff at dawn. The first light of day breaks over the horizon, and suddenly everything you couldn't see in the darkness becomes visible. The jagged rocks, the vast ocean, the dizzying drop below. The sight is breathtaking, but also terrifying. This is what truth feels like when we finally dare to look at it. Clarity is beautiful, but it is not always comforting. Socrates believed that this was the role of philosophy, not to flatter us, but to disturb us. In the Apology, he compared himself to a gadfly stinging a sluggish horse, an irritant meant to keep Athens awake. He knew that truth, once seen, demands responsibility. That is why most people choose shadows in Plato's cave, rather than risk the painful brightness of the sun. Friedrich Nietzsche sharpened this point with his famous line, "Truth is not for everyone." He believed that most people cannot bear too much reality. To face the truth requires strength, not just intellectual strength, but moral courage. Because once you see clearly, you can no longer hide behind illusions. You must act differently, live differently, or else live with the weight of your own hypocrisy. Carl Jung, too, understood this. He taught that each of us carries within us a shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves we would rather not acknowledge. To see the truth of the world requires that we first confront the truth within ourselves. Otherwise, we project our darkness outward, blaming leaders, systems, or fate, while refusing to face our own complicity. George Carlin embodied this courage to see. He never softened the blow. He mocked the illusions of politics, religion, consumer culture, not because he hated people, but because he wanted them awake. His comedy was not cynicism, but a form of brutal honesty. He was willing to say aloud what others only whispered, to look at society's shadow without blinking. That is what made him both dangerous and prophetic. But here is the challenge. Courage to see is not just about leaders and systems. It is about you. It is about your life. What truths are already in front of you that you have been unwilling to face? A broken relationship, a dead-end job, a habit that is destroying your spirit? We do not need governments to deceive us when we so often deceive ourselves. Kierkegaard described this as the sickness unto death, despair that arises when a person refuses to become their true self. To see the truth is to realize not only how the world deceives us, but how we deceive ourselves into smallness, conformity, distraction. The courage to see means the courage to live authentically without excuses. And here is the paradox. Seeing the truth hurts, but it also heals. Nietzsche wrote, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." Jung insisted that integrating the shadow leads to wholeness. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. Truth may be heavy, but it is also liberating. The sixth and final revelation is this: to see the truth is not an intellectual act, but a moral one. It requires courage. Then the guiding question becomes, are you willing to bear the weight of seeing not just the lies of leaders, but your own illusions, and to live differently because of it? Because in the end, leaders do not hide the truth from us. We hide it from ourselves. The only real question is, when the sun rises, will you have the courage to open your eyes? So we return to the paradox with which we began. The truth is rarely buried in darkness. More often, it stands in plain sight, visible, even obvious, yet unseen. Leaders know this. Carlin knew this, and perhaps now you can feel it too. Think back through the 6 revelations we've explored. The distraction of spectacle, how noise and entertainment overwhelm us until truth fades into the background. The illusion of choice, how freedom is often reduced to carefully curated options, keeping us busy within the cage. The weaponization of language, how words themselves can be twisted into masks that conceal the rawness of reality. The psychology of denial, how we collude in our own blindness, refusing to see what would demand too much of us. The normalization of the absurd, how repetition dulls our outrage until horrors become routine. The courage to see, the final test, not of intellect, but of character, to bear the weight of truth and still stand. Together, these insights reveal something unsettling. Leaders do not need to lock the truth away in vaults or bury it beneath lies. All they must do is present it in ways we cannot or will not confront. The real battlefield is not secrecy, but perception, not concealment, but our willingness to look. George Carlin stood on stage and tried, in his own biting way, to shake us awake. He knew that laughter could disarm us long enough to slip in a truth too sharp to swallow raw. But even he admitted the futility at times, that people often prefer the joke to the revelation, the circus to the clarity. And yet, the fact that you are here, listening, tells me something important. You are not content with shadows. You sense there is more to be seen. You are asking the questions most avoid. That alone sets you apart. But awareness is not the end. It is the beginning. To see the truth is to inherit responsibility. Once you recognize how the spectacle distracts, how language deceives, how denial imprisons, you cannot unknow it. The question becomes, what will you do with this clarity? Will you slip back into the comfort of distraction, or will you choose to live differently, to question, to notice, to resist normalization? Because truth is not passive. It asks something of you. It asks for courage. Socrates insisted that philosophy was not about cleverness, but about becoming a certain kind of person, someone willing to live in the light, however uncomfortable. Nietzsche demanded strength to face reality without illusions. Jung asked us to integrate our shadow rather than project it outward. These thinkers did not call us to despair, but to transformation. The world does not need more people entertained to death. It needs people who can see, who can cut through spectacle, who can call things by their true names, who can resist the comfort of illusions. That could be you. That must be you. So let me leave you with this challenge. The next time you hear a leader speak, read a headline, or laugh at the absurdity of the world, pause and ask, what truth is hiding in plain sight here? And what does it demand of me? If this journey has stirred something in you, consider subscribing. Each week we explore questions that ask more of us than easy answers. And if you found yourself wrestling with these ideas, share your reflections in the comments. Because philosophy is not a monologue, it is a conversation, and the courage to see is strengthened when shared. The truth has always been there. The only question is, will you look